I'm excited to continue in this series that we have been in for the last few weeks. And to kind of set us up for today, I remember one time I went to a pastor's conference, and there's a speaker coming in from Canada that we were going to listen to. We were pumped to hear because it's about a few hundred pastors in the room, and we were excited to hear from the speaker that morning. And he walks out onto the stage, and myself and all the guys that I'm there with, all of us just audibly gasp. We're like, because the guy walks out and he doesn't have any pants on, right? Like, there's no pants on. I'm like, I'm in the middle of a scandal. Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? I shouldn't be here. People are going to find out about this. But obviously the person on stage is not as shaken as he should be if he were to walk out without any pants on. And then I realize his pants are just the same color as his skin, right? Like, that's what happened. And so just a word of advice to my Caucasian friends in the room: if your clothes are the color of a Band-Aid, right? Like, they're going to look weird when you're on stage talking in front of people. Now, I don't know, sorry. As shocking as this is, there's a point to that story. Right? So obviously his pants did not look good on him. And I want to talk today about something that does not look good on you or me or any of us. We're talking today about being self-righteous. Self-righteousness. Self-righteousness does not look good on anyone. Amen? And I think a lot of times we want to automatically attribute self-righteousness to being solely a religious thing. But self-righteousness is not just a religious thing, it's a human thing. Because it incorporates a whole lot of things, doesn't it? Self-righteousness, this happens anytime when our rightness is so internalized that it becomes a part of our identity. And it could be your rightness about any view. It could be your rightness on religion, your rightness on politics, your rightness on college sports. When that becomes internalized, it becomes a part of your identity. When any view becomes a part of your identity, you automatically want to internalize that for other people, don't you? And now if you don't share the same view that I do, then I have permission to disdain you and to not like you and to look down on you because I'm right. Not just I have the right view, I'm right. I'm righteous. I'm self-righteous. There's something righter about me than there is about you. That's what it means at the end of the day. Not just, again, that I hold the right view, but that I am right. Now, here's the thing. When your view about anything, again, religion, politics, college sports, whatever it might be, gives you an excuse to look down on other people, to be discouraging to them, to disdain them in any way, you might be right, but you are not righteous. You might be right, but you are not righteous, at least according to Jesus. We'll get there in just a second, all right? Here's what we've been talking about for the past few weeks. And excuse my pollen voice this morning. I'm sorry if you're a guest with us today. I do not usually sound this manly. It's unusual, but it's a good thing. Let's just take it for what it is, right? We're in this series called Jesus Reconstructed. And in this series, we've been looking to learn about Jesus, who he really is, to investigate his teaching, his life, and who he truly claimed to be. Because we're asking this question: can we trust the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as reliable accounts of actual events? Because those Gospels, those 4 books of the Bible, they're kind of like a biography of Jesus. They tell us about his life, his miracles, his work, and they tell us about his teaching. And if we can trust those, then we got to sit up straight and we got to pay attention to what they tell us about Jesus, because the credibility of the Christian faith, the veracity of the Christian faith, at the end of the day, rises and falls on the identity of one single individual, and that is Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And so what we've been doing is we've been looking at the Gospel of Luke. It's one of those accounts of Jesus' life. And we're looking at certain parts in the Gospel of Luke where he tries to show us a little bit about who Jesus is. And in looking at the life of Jesus, we learn something about the nature, the character, and the quality of God the Father as Jesus puts his character on display for us. The beautiful thing about Luke is that he is educated. He is a physician. He takes copious notes, and we have that so that we can learn about who Christ is. And Luke tells us his agenda right from the get-go. If you look at Luke chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, he tells us the reason that he is writing these things that we are reading, that we are learning from. Luke says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. Luke is telling you he's not the only person, that many people have taken it upon themselves to write about. When it says fulfilled among us, it's the stuff that's happening in their lifetime. And we've got to see this, because you would ask the question, like, why would someone take it upon themselves to write about the life and the teachings of this Galilean carpenter who ends up being executed by the Roman government? Why would someone take it upon themselves? Well, it's because of the things that were fulfilled among them. He's saying, man, we saw some incredible things. We heard teaching that was taught with such authority that we knew it could only come from God. We saw miracles happen. I think Luke and the eyewitnesses that Luke talked to write these words for us, they would say one time, over and over and over, this guy would say that one day he would be killed and that a few days later he would rise from the dead, and everybody just thought he was weird and everyone just thought he was crazy for saying that. But then one day he did it. And when he did it, all of us were like, we got to write this down, right? Like something's happening. There's something to this guy. You have to see how strange, how odd is it that many people would take it upon themselves to record these things. Luke says he's one of many, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Luke is saying, I'm not just making this stuff up. This is not a fairy tale. I'm not just adding in details for the sake of adding in details. He's saying, I'm talking to people, taking copious notes, carefully examining what they experienced and what they heard and what they saw. And I am telling you, I'm writing this down while those people are still alive, and I'm telling you about the life of Jesus. And what's important is this, and maybe this is just the way that I think. Luke did not undertake to write a portion of the Bible for us. He's not thinking like, I'm going to write this and it's going to be religious literature and one day they'll talk about it in Norman, Oklahoma 2,000 years from now. Luke is not going to Starbucks every morning at 7 a.m. like, all right, I got to knock out 3,000 words today. Hopefully I can get from Luke chapter 1 to Luke chapter 3. Like, that's not what he's doing. He is just writing an account of what happened because he felt that it was so incredible, so miraculous, so paradigm shifting and life changing that he felt other people needed to know about this Jesus and what he did and what he taught us. And so that's why we're looking at the Gospel of Luke, and that's how we look at these Gospels overall. Jesus taught, he performed miracles. Eventually, again, he rose from the grave, but ultimately he came to show us what God is like and who God likes. And I don't know if any of you have ever asked that question. What is God like and who does he like? Because this series is really designed for those of you who might be considering or reconsidering or considering leaving the Christian faith. Whether you're watching online, whether you're here in the room, this is designed for those of you who might just be like, I don't know. I think I'm on the fence. I don't know what I want to believe. I don't know what this means. There's some things that I've seen that are confusing. And let me tell you what has been surprising for me over these past few weeks. It's the people that have come up to me and said, thank you so much for this because I have really been struggling, to which I respond, you? Like, I had no idea. Like, you would be surprised in your family, in your circle of friends, and the people that you know, how many people, because of what's been going on in the world, because of maybe the image of the church, the way we present Jesus, you would be surprised how many people are reconsidering, deconstructing, thinking about walking away from their faith. So we're going to learn who Jesus really is. Today we're going to see what God is like and who God likes as we look at Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 is fairly well known to us. In this chapter, Jesus is going to teach us three parables Parables are allegories. It's kind of like a story. So this is not, Jesus is not telling you about events that actually happened. He's telling you a story. But the point of the story is to reveal a deeper and more profound truth, to teach you something, to teach you a spiritual truth, to teach you something about the nature and the character of God. So there's 3 stories that he's going to go into in Luke chapter 15. But with Luke chapter 15, because one of these is so familiar to us that we might just be like, man, I already know all this stuff, Pastor. Why did I come to church? It's in the rain. I came in the rain. Teach me something new, right? But we've got to understand that the context of these parables is almost as important as the parable themselves. The audience, the people, the place where Jesus is teaching is as important as the parable itself. So let's look first at the audience in Luke chapter 15. Luke 15:1 tells us, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. So I love this. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think it's interesting that tax collectors and sinners get separate categories, right? Like tax collectors aren't even good enough to be lumped in with sinners. They got to be on their own. And so in ancient Judea, it's like whatever happened to you, whatever you did wrong, whatever story you got to tell, at the end of the story, you would tell your mom and dad, at least I'm not a tax collector, right? Like, okay, I messed up. I'll give you that one, but at least I'm not a tax collector. And look what's so fascinating. These are people who would be considered in that day and age to be hopelessly separated from God. They are unclean, ceremonially unclean, religiously unclean. They cannot even go. They cannot even go to the temple to worship. But tax collectors and sinners have gathered together to hear Jesus. To which Luke, as he's writing, he'd be like, isn't that so cool? Isn't that amazing? Tax collectors and sinners. And we would respond to Luke like, it's actually kind of confusing. Because in the world we live in, like people like that would never gather together with us to hear about Jesus. It's actually kind of strange to us. And maybe that's because the church hasn't always gotten this right. And maybe if the church had always gotten this right, we would have a crowd a little bit more like Jesus' crowd in that moment. Maybe I wouldn't have to teach a series like this. I don't know. But we learned something so important about who is gathering around Jesus. But they're not the only ones there. It's not just the tax collectors and the sinners. Also in verse 2, we see, but another group of people, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, are also there. And look what they do. A great verb. I just love it. They muttered, right? They're muttering. And what are they muttering? They're muttering, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. In other words, they're saying like, man, what is he doing? If this guy was really from God, these people would avoid him the way they avoid us, right? Like these people would cross the street and walk away from him the way they do for us. If this guy was really from God, he would avoid the tax collectors and the sinners, and he would be eating with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Like, what is the deal with this Jesus guy? And the thing is, Jesus is not concerned with guilt by association. That's what they want to put on him. He eats with tax collectors and sinners. He's a friend of sinners. And they're trying to attribute this guilt by association to Jesus. And the truth of the matter is, if Jesus was concerned about guilt by association, he would have stayed in heaven, right? Like, he would not have come here. He would not have messed with any of us, right? Let's just be honest. So Jesus, he doesn't care. And if you're taking notes, the first thing I want you to write down, the first thing I want you to see from Luke 15 is this, that people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. People, it's amazing as you read through the Gospels and as you look at the world that we live in today, the culture around Christianity or what people's opinions of the church might be, it blows my mind to think that in the life and the ministry of Jesus, this is how things were, that people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. Because I guarantee you, he was more righteous than you and me. He was righteous, but he was not self-righteous. Righteous, but not self-righteous. He was holy, perfectly holy. But he held his righteousness, carried his righteousness in such a way that it did not push away those who would be considered unrighteous. Instead, somehow it drew them in to discover more about who God is, about who the Father is, and what he desired for them. He welcomes sinners and he eats with them. And I wonder, what would it be like if the church had been like Jesus for the past 2,000 years? Where would we be now? Because at one point, that's how the church was. And that is why we are here 2,000 years later. Because the early church, this is how it was. This is who Jesus was. This is how he taught us to live. And so the question I want to ask you this morning is, which one are you? Which way do you lean? We've got tax collectors and sinners on one side, and we have Pharisees and teachers of the law on the other side. Now, I got to admit, I would fall more into the Pharisees and teachers of the law category. There's this something in me that sometimes can naturally rise up where I'm like, oh my gosh, these people, why can't they just figure it out? Why can't they just get it together? It's all in the book. Why do I have to talk about the same thing all the time? There's a part of me that can be that way. And especially, I hate to admit this, I can admit this now because I've been doing this for a long time. When I first got into ministry, it was bad. It was really bad, y'all. Terrible. And so I don't like any young pastors. No, I was kidding. But it was really bad. There's a lot of growth that had to happen there. And so maybe there are some of you in the room that you would fall into that category. You're very quick to, well, those people, and they're like this. And you want to put all of your identity and the things that you have internalized, you want to put it on them. If that's you, would you, no, I'm just kidding, you have to raise your hand. That's hard to do because you don't know how everybody else will answer, right? It's in front row, Simi, you don't know what anyone said, right? You might raise your hand. The other side of it is there's some of you here, and you fall into the tax collectors and sinners category. And by that, don't read too much into it. What I mean by that is simply this. You might be here thinking, I've heard that God loves everyone, but I don't know if God necessarily likes me. And you would say, man, my story and my mistakes and the things that I've been through and the things that I've done, I just don't know how God would feel about me. And so the question is, which way do you lean? Which one are you? Because here's the thing. Both of the groups that Jesus is talking to, they are confused about God. They're confused about his character. They're confused about how he feels about people. They're confused about God the Father. And so Jesus is going to bring great clarity to them through these three parables. And these three parables have something in common. They're all about something valuable that has been lost. So we begin in Luke chapter 15, verse 4. Jesus begins with a parable about sheep. And he says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And Jesus' audience, all of them, the Pharisees and the sinners, the tax collectors, everybody, they'd be like, well, duh, of course, we know all about sheep. Yes, that's exactly what you would do. You would leave 99, you would go chase after the one. That's what anybody would do. But can I just be honest? I don't know about sheep, all right? And I don't know about you, but most of you are suburban Normanites. You don't know about sheep either. I got 99 problems. A sheep ain't one, right? And so I don't know about sheep. So let's make this Americanized for us, okay? Forget sheep. Let's talk about credit cards and children, okay? And the point that Jesus is making in this parable is, I'm not going to come out one day and tell my wife, Simi, I've lost my visa and our 7-year-old. I got no idea where they are. But don't worry, I still got the American Express and the 10-year-old is fine. So we're good. We ain't got to do nothing. We're okay, right? Here's the point that Jesus is making. Here's the point that he's making. We don't simply console ourselves with what is not lost. And if you're taking notes, write that down. Luke 15 is telling you we don't just take it easy. We don't comfort and console ourselves with what is not lost. We don't look at a world that is far from God and doesn't know him. We don't look at a world and all the tragedy and pain and difficulty that befalls people. We don't look at a generation with increasing rates of depression and loneliness and hurt and just say, well, you know what? My kids are okay. You know what? Most of my family is all right. We're okay. You don't just console yourselves with what is not lost, right? You go and you search, you go and you do everything you can. And so Jesus, this is what he does. Jesus then, he pulls out of this parable for a second and he kind of interprets it for them. Maybe they're kind of like us, a little dumb. And so Jesus is like, let me tell you what it means. And he tells them that it's showing something about the nature of God. Verse 7, he says, I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. And they would understand that word repent to mean to be reconnected, to come back into the family. I am a child of God. I am who he says I am, right? To be reconnected and come back into the family. And the crowd would say, Jesus, are you telling us that God views unrighteous people as something valuable that needs to be reconnected to its owner? Because that's not how we view unrighteous people. That's what they would say. That is not how we view unrighteous people. Is that how you view the people who are not as right as you? Is that how you view the people who are not as left as you? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, is that how you view people who are not as right as you? Like, if you think about the things that are off limits at Thanksgiving dinner, it's conversations about like politics and religion, right? Or college sports, again, for some of you. And so it's because those are areas where we really do, we internalize our beliefs so much that they become a part of our identity, right? And they become so much a part of our identity, we're just like, you can't even talk about this. Because you have no way to talk about this without disdain and hate towards the person who's sitting on the other side of you. And what if instead of going through life this way, we saw the person sitting on the other side of the table from us and thought, this is somebody who is extremely valuable to God. This is someone who belongs to God, and they have been separated from God, and he longs to be in a relationship with them. Again, what if we viewed people that way? So then Jesus goes on to the next parable. Remember, there's 3 of them. And he says something revolutionary. Maybe not everybody in the crowd catches how revolutionary it is. People, Americans in suburban Norman, we for sure will not catch how revolutionary it is. We might just glance right over it. But the next thing Jesus says in verse 8 is, or suppose a woman. And that's revolutionary because nobody ever talked to women or about women or cared about women in that day and age. Like, that's what's revolutionary about what Jesus is doing here. And so there's a subset of people in that audience. It doesn't matter, tax collector, Pharisee, it doesn't matter who you are. There's a subset of people who would be like, what? Is this guy actually telling a story about a woman? I've never heard such a thing, right? And if we knew the way that Jesus would consistently elevate the dignity and the position of women in his teaching in the way that it was so countercultural, so revolutionary, it truly would let us know how much he cared for the plight of women. There's so many things that change. There's a lot of stuff that we just take for granted now. And even when we read a text like this, we might take it for granted because of the world that we live in. But when Jesus said these things and did these things, it was dangerous. And it was edgy, and he was pushing people to the edge of their capacity. Think about even his disciples who know that when he teaches these parables, one of the figures in each parable is kind of a God figure. And the disciples are thinking, he's about to make this woman the God figure in this parable. Like, these people are going to kill us. It's dangerous, but Jesus, he didn't care. He changed everything. That's why they wrote it down. Suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And the audience would, yeah. If you lose one coin, like, you would turn the house upside down to find what you have lost. It's valuable. It is important. It is worth the effort. It is worth the work. It is worth the sacrifice. So then Jesus gets to the 3rd parable. This is one of Jesus's best known parables. It's about a father and 2 sons. We know this as the parable of the prodigal son. And we're familiar with it. I think I even taught about this in January. We're familiar with it. But When we get to texts that are familiar, I want the audience who are familiar with these texts to understand something. My wife and I, we were at an event last year, at the end of last year. We're in Dallas, Texas. It's a conference for ministry leaders. And during worship one day, one of our old school jams comes on. What were they saying? Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness, oh God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. It's like one of my favorite songs. And Simi and I are like, yeah, that's my jam. Like, I know this song from childhood, right? And there's a young lady that was sitting next to us. And this young lady, she didn't grow up the way we grew up. She was actually a former Hindu convert. And I'm like, how come she's not as affected by this song as I am? Like, what is she doing? What's wrong with her? And later she told us, she's like, I never heard that song. I don't know that song. I didn't grow up in church like you guys. Like, I don't know that song. It means nothing to me. And maybe that's how the story of the prodigal son could be. Like, there might be some of you in the room like, are we talking about this? We know this parable, Jason. I learned it when I was 3 years old. But I also know this, that there's someone in this room, there's someone watching online who's going to be like, man, like, I never thought of it that way. And I never thought that Jesus was like that. I never thought that God was like that, right? So for those of you who are upset that this is what we're talking about, I put that out there for you, okay? So there's a father. He has two sons. The younger son is truly waiting for his dad to die because he wants his part of the inheritance. He wants his part of the estate and what's coming to him. So he is waiting for his dad to die. But dad just keeps getting older. Dad won't die. And this guy's like, man, I'm just wasting my life waiting to get what my dad is supposed to give me. I want to go and live my life. I want to go and do my thing. So Jesus tells this story, Luke 15:12. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Give me my share of the estate. And you have this audience, two very different groups of people. Tax collectors and teachers of the law, and over here you got tax collectors and sinners, and over here you got Pharisees and teachers of the law. Two different people. But both groups of people at this point would gasp because they know exactly what this young man has just said. This young man has said, Dad, I wish you were dead. My life would be better if you were gone and if I just had what you're supposed to give me. What kind of person would do, this entitled little brat? Like, the whole audience is upset until Jesus says the next thing. So the father divided his property between them. And I bet they would be like, why would he do that? Like why would he give over to this entitled, bratty request? And what they're missing is the father knows that the son is lost. He may not be spatially lost like the sheep or the coin, like he's right there, but he's relationally lost. He doesn't want to have anything to do with the father. He just wants the father's stuff. He's lost. And so this father's like, I don't care. I will give you half of what I've spent my lifetime building. I'll give you half of it if it means any chance that you would stay in relationship with me. The crowd misses that. The father's like, I'll do anything. I'll do anything for my son to come back into relationship with me. So he takes this money. It says he goes off into the far country. He blows the money. And we don't know exactly how long it takes. It's probably just a few months. It could be even less than that. And it's a story that you come back to over and over throughout your life if you followed Jesus for a long time. And for me now, as a father, as someone who's trying to build something for my family and for the future, there's a part of this that sticks out to me now that never stuck out to me before. Like, this kid blows in a couple of months half of what his dad spent his whole life building. Like, this is no small thing. His dad has spent his entire life building wealth for his family, and this kid blows it in a couple of months. And then he's out of money. After he runs out of money, a famine hits the land. Now, we don't know famine very well, right? Like, famine for us is like, it's snowing and Brahms is out of milk and bread. Like, that's, but there's eventually going to be food again, right? So we don't really understand famine. For them, famine means like, man, there's no food. And we don't know when there will be food again. So a famine hits the land after this guy has blown all his money. And in the middle of that, he goes and he tries to find a job. So he finds a job working for a pig farmer. He's feeding the pigs. And Jesus' audience, they know how degrading this is. They know how disgusting this is. Oh, this Jewish boy is feeding pigs. And they're all just like, yeah, he got what was coming to him. Great, Jesus, finally, a good story, all right? A good story. He got what was coming to him. He's feeding the pigs. He's so hungry, he longs to eat some of the pigs' food. And so he goes to his boss and says, hey, I'm starving. Can I have a little bit of what you're feeding the pig? And the boss essentially says, the pigs are worth more to me than you are. Right? I need the pigs to be healthy. It's a famine, didn't you know? So, no, you can't have any of the food. And this guy hits rock bottom. And when he hits rock bottom, I love the words that are used there in the NIV. It says he came to his senses. He hit rock bottom and he came to his senses. And I don't say this lightly, that maybe that's what brought you to church in this season. Like maybe if you've been coming for a couple of weeks, maybe that's why you've been coming for a couple of weeks. If it's your first time here today, maybe that's why. If you're just randomly turning something on YouTube and you're watching this message, maybe that's why you're watching. Because one day you got up and you looked in the mirror and you were just like, who is that guy? Who is that person? I never thought I would be here. I never thought it would be like this. I never thought my life would be this way. I never thought this would happen. And if you're turning back to God, I'm so glad that you're here. It's a perfect place for you to be. It's a perfect place for you to learn how the character of the Father longs for you and desires fellowship with you and wants to know you more. So this guy comes to his senses and he says in verse 18, I will set out and go back to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and he went to his father. That's what happened. I'm in the middle of a very serious moment, but I'm going to say this. He came up a little too early, so I got a little bit longer to go, all right? So stick with me. Don't start mentally checking out on me right now. But it's going to make the message so much better, right? The end of it is going to be so good. Thank you. And so he says, I got up. He goes back to his father. He's rehearsing this speech in his head. As he goes back, he's like, this is what I'm going to say, and maybe he'll take me back. The servants are better off, Dad. Will you just make me like one of your servants? So he leaves the pig trough and he heads home. And the crowd, again, two different groups of people, but both of them are united in this. They're like, I know what the dad's going to do because I know what I would do. I know exactly what the father's going to do. And the kid comes and the father sees him from far away. The father's standing on the porch and he sees him from far away. And Jesus over and over has said these things throughout the Gospels. The Apostle Paul talks about this, how Jesus talked about how everything that came before him is just a shadow, something that just shows us a little glimpse of what God might be like. But Jesus is the fulfillment, the culmination of the character and the nature of God. Right? We read in John, it says that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That Jesus is God in a body who has come to glorify God the Father. He shows us what God is like. And this is one of those places where he's about to show us what God is like. Because as the younger son is rehearsing his lines, and as he's coming home, and as he's planning what to say, the father runs. And I want you to look what it says there, Luke 15:20. But while he was still a long way off, he saw his father. His father saw him, and he was filled with. And the question that we've got to ask, the question I want you to consider, is if the father was like you, what would go in that blank? If the father was like me, what would go in that blank? And Jesus is telling tax collectors, if he's like you, what do you think goes in that blank? And he's telling sinners, if he's like you, what goes in that blank? And Pharisees and teachers of the law, if he's like you, what goes in that blank? Because according to Jesus, we've all been that son. We've all been that kid at some point in our lives. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And the crowd is like, you got to be kidding me. How can the Father treat him that way? And Jesus is the master storyteller. Mark Twain actually said this is the greatest short story ever written. So maybe Luke gets credit for writing it and Jesus gets credit for saying it. But the master storyteller just pushes them a little bit further. I mean, he's going to push them to the edge of what they can handle. Because the Father has compassion for them. And then it says he ran to his son. It is undignified for a man of that age to run in this culture. He's willing to be undignified. He runs to his son. Threw his arms around. Are you kidding me? This kid just came from the pigs. Are you kidding me? He's going to touch him. He's going to hug him. He's going to bring him in close. And Jesus goes even further. Kisses him. And maybe there's someone in the room who's like, you got to be kidding me. This is disgusting. This is wrong. Religiously, this is wrong. That's how the Father treats the Son when he comes in. He just takes it further and further. Look at verse 22. The Father then says to his servant, quick, bring me the best robe and put it on him. The Son's practicing this speech. He doesn't even get to say it. He wants to just come and be a servant in his dad's house. The Father says, put a robe on him. He's not a servant. He's my son. So he needs to look the part. Put a robe on him. Put a ring on his finger. That signet ring is a symbol of his sonship. Put a ring on his finger. He is my son. Put sandals on his feet. He's not like everybody else. He's my son. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. Now, if I'm there and I get to give my input to the dad, I'm like, shouldn't we wait a bit? I mean, he just came back, right? And he has messed up. He does not have a good track record. Let's give it a week, man. Let's give it a week. But look what the Father says. I need you to see this. It's not about his son's behavior. It's all about relationship. His response is, this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he is found. So they begin to celebrate. If you're taking notes, this is the last point here from Luke 15, but it is simply this. God doesn't see good people and bad people. God sees lost people and found people. God sees lost people and found people. And the Father's not going to wait for this kid to prove himself or earn back what he has lost or anything like that. He's like, this is my son, and he was lost. He was dead, but he is found, and he is alive. There's this Greek word. It is the verb that shows up all throughout this parable. Every time you see the verb for lost, the Greek word there is apolumi. And you get to leave here a little bit smarter today because you learned something you didn't know before. Apolumi. It means lost. It means disregarded. It means thrown out. It means out there on its own to perish. There's a lot of deep meaning in this word apolumi. And like I said, it shows up every time you see the word lost in all these parables, but it also shows up in another very well-known scripture. There's a scripture in John that says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whosoever believes in him shall not apolumi, shall not be lost. And we translate it a little bit differently. That's what it says, shall not be lost, shall not be cast out and let over to death and destruction, but shall be brought back in for eternal life. Jesus says, this is the reason that I came. I came for those who were lost to God, that I might find them and bring them back to their Father. Now, the story doesn't end there. Unfortunately, there's another brother, right? There's two kids. And I say unfortunately because I'm more like the other brother and he sucks. And so like I hate this part of the story, but it's where I learn. It's where I learn. Verse 28 says the older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. So basically, it seems like younger brother comes home, they throw a party, a servant goes out to the field where the older brother is working, and the servant is like, hey man, I've got good news and I got bad news. And it's the same news, right? Your brother is home. So older brother comes back. He sees them throwing this party. And you've got to think about this. Dad's property has been divided. And it's been given to younger brother. Half of it is given to younger brother, and younger brother has blown it. So I think older brother walks up to the house and he hears about a robe, and he hears about a ring, and he hears about sandals, and he hears about the fattened calf, and he hears about this elaborate party, and he's thinking, now that's my stuff. Like now dad is spending my stuff, and he refuses to go in. He won't even go in the house. And for people like me and for people like Pharisees and teachers of the law who might be in the room, we've got to remember, you can be on the porch and be as far away from the Father as if you were in the distant country squandering all his money. There's a lot of people who come to church every week and they're on the porch. They're still not in the party with the Father. And that's the brother. And so here's what he says to his dad. Look, all these years, I've been slaving for you. I've never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property, look how quickly he is ready to throw his brother under the bus, squandered your property with prostitutes. He comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? Like this guy who has messed up in every way, how could you treat him so well? And the father says, again, verse 32, we had to celebrate. We had to be glad because this brother of yours was dead and he's alive again. He was lost and he is found. How differently would the story go if the younger brother, even if he came to his senses, he repents, he's like, I'm not going to live this life anymore. I'm going to change my life. If he came home and instead of meeting the father first, what if he had met his older brother? Like, how differently does the story go? We've got to be careful. We've got to be careful about our self-righteousness. It does not look good on anyone. It especially does not look good on Christians. Because we recognize we are better than no one. We're just a little better off because we have found grace through faith in Jesus Christ, and he has saved us, and he has made us alive. That's all we have. And so we're a part of this search crew now, this search committee to go and find the lost and bring them back to the Father. What if just for a week, you and I, all of us at New Life Bible Church, what if we lived this way? If we saw every person who was far from God, and rather than being like, well, those, I can't believe those, I can't, rather than reacting to them that way with disdain and discouragement, what if we saw them as someone who's lost and very precious to the Father, valuable to the Father? How would we react differently to them? We don't size people up and write them off. We don't size people up and write them off. And let me say this with all humbleness, if your version of Christianity allows you to size people up and write them off, you might have the wrong version. And I think you for sure don't have the Jesus version. It's not the Jesus version. We don't get disgusted with lost things, right? We go and we find them. We don't get disgusted with lost things. And just as the father in Jesus' parable is willing to sacrifice half of his wealth, half of what he spent his whole life accumulating, at the end of the Gospel of Luke, we see Jesus also willing to sacrifice. He gives up his own life that he can go and rescue the lost, that he can make a way for the lost to be found and for the dead to come back to life. Who will you be? Who will you be? For those of you who follow Jesus, I pray that you grow in your sanctification and that you are righteous. We don't discount that. We don't water that down at all. I pray that you are righteous, but not self-righteous. That you know who you are, who God has called you to be, and you know the work that he has called you to bring back what belongs to him. Are you with me in that? Let's pray together. Lord.